Hey guys, enjoy these new 20 stories. We hope you enjoy them. Let us know your thoughts. And as always, most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button too. It's free and does so much for us. We're forever grateful. Now to the stories.
I still get chills thinking about the Tinder match that turned my life upside down. I've been using the app on and off for a couple of years, mostly for casual dates and the occasional hookup. Nothing serious, just trying to meet new people in a new city. I wasn't looking for the one, but wasn't opposed to that. Ellie seemed cool enough. Her profile was pretty standard. A couple of smiling photos, one with a dog, another hiking the mountains. Her bio mentioned she was a writer, liked coffee, and was looking for someone to explore the city with. Seemed harmless, right? We matched pretty quickly, and the conversation flowed easily. She was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for drinks at a local bar. Ellie was even more attractive in person. She had this bright, infectious energy that drew me in immediately. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Our conversation was flowing and easy. She seemed genuinely interested in me. I felt a real connection, something I hadn't felt in a long time. We both admitted to being tired of the dating scene. The night ended with a kiss outside her apartment, and I went home feeling like I'd finally met someone special. We went out again a few days later, then again the week after. Things were progressing quickly when it felt right. Ellie was spending more and more time at my place, and I was starting to picture a future with her. That's probably where I messed up, letting my guard down too soon. The first sign that something was off came subtly. She started asking increasingly personal questions, things about my childhood, my family, my deepest fears. At first, I chalked it up to her being a writer, always looking for material. But the questions became more intense, almost intrusive. She wanted to know about past relationships, past traumas, things I'd rather forget. Then there were the late night phone calls. Ellie would call me at all hours of the night, sometimes just to talk, sometimes just to breathe heavily into the phone. It was creepy, but I convinced myself it was just her way of showing she cared. She told me about her childhood, how she didn't have the best parenting or childhood, how she'd struggled to make friends. One evening, I came home from work to find Ellie rearranging my apartment. Not just tidying up, rearranging. My furniture was in different places, my books were organized in a way that made no sense, and my personal belongings had been moved around. I asked her what she was doing, and she just smiled and said she was making the space more ours. I was annoyed, but I tried to let it slide. It was my place. Things escalated quickly from there. Ellie started isolating me from my friends. She'd get jealous whenever I made plans without her, accusing me of not caring about her. She'd create drama out of nothing just to keep me focused on her. Eventually, I stopped seeing my friends altogether just to avoid the arguments. She would make up things and then tell me I'm the problem. Then came the obsession with my ex. Even though I hadn't talked to my ex in years, Ellie seemed fixated on her. She'd constantly bring her up in conversation, asking me about our relationship, our breakup, everything. She even started stalking my ex's social media, obsessively analyzing her photos and posts. It was bizarre and unsettling. One afternoon, I got a call from my ex. She was terrified. Someone had been leaving disturbing messages on her doorstep. Things like, "He belongs to me now and stay away from what's mine." She suspected it was Ellie. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew it was true. I confronted Ellie and she denied everything at first. But then she broke down sobbing and confessed that she was obsessed with me, that she couldn't bear the thought of anyone else having me. She said she didn't mean to scare my ex, she just wanted her to know that I was hers now. That's when I knew I had to get out. I told Ellie it was over, that I couldn't be with someone who was so controlling and unstable. She didn't take it well. She screamed, she cried, she begged me to stay. When I wouldn't budge, she turned violent. She started throwing things, hitting me, scratching me. I had to physically restrain her to get her to calm down. I managed to get her out of my apartment, but I knew it wasn't over. I changed my locks, blocked her number, and cut off all contact. But I still felt like I was being watched. I'd see her car parked down the street, or catch glimpses of her in the shadows. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from my living room. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept out of my bedroom. There was Ellie standing in the middle of my living room holding a knife. She had somehow gotten a key to my apartment. She smiled at me, a chilling, vacant smile. "I told you you belonged to me," she whispered. I lunged at her with the bat, knocking the knife out of her hand. We struggled for what felt like an eternity, until I finally managed to overpower her and pin her to the ground. I called the police, and they took her away. Ellie was arrested and charged with stalking, harassment, and breaking and entering. She was eventually sentenced to a psychiatric facility. I moved to a new city and tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. But I still have nightmares about Ellie. I see her face in the crowd, hear her voice in the wind. I know she's still out there somewhere waiting, and I'm terrified that one day she'll find me again. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more cautious now. I take things slow and I look for red flags. I know that not everyone on Tinder is a psycho, but Ellie taught me a valuable lesson. You can never really know someone until it's too late. And sometimes the person you think you love is the person you should be most afraid of. I never imagined I'd be telling this story, mostly because I'm the guy who usually laughs at the dating app horror stories. You know, the ones where someone shows up looking nothing like their profile picture, or they spend the whole day talking about their ex, or they try to sell you essential oils. I thought I was immune to that kind of awkwardness. I was wrong, so wrong. I was on Tinder for the same reason most guys are. A mix of boredom and fleeting hope that I might actually connect with someone cool. I had a few decent dates, a few disastrous ones, but mostly just a lot of swiping and ghosting. Then I matched with Maya. Her profile was intriguing. She had a few pictures, one of her hiking in the mountains, another of her playing guitar, and one that was just her eyes, which were this intense, piercing green. Her bio was short and sweet, lover of nature, music, and deep conversations. Okay, cool, I thought. This could be interesting. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. She was smart, funny, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked about everything: our favorite books, our dreams for the future, our biggest fears. She wasn't like anyone else I'd met on the app. There was a depth to her that I found incredibly appealing. After a week of nonstop texting, we decided to meet up. She suggested a secluded spot, a clearing in the woods near a local hiking trail. It was a bit unconventional for a first date, but she said she wanted to show me her favorite place to watch the sunset. I'm a sucker for nature, so I agreed. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags waving frantically in my face, but I was too caught up in the idea of meeting this amazing woman. I drove out to the trailhead on Saturday afternoon, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling in my stomach. I followed the trail for about half a mile until I reached the clearing Maya had described. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the trees. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely empty. I waited for about 15 minutes, checking my phone every few seconds. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she got lost. I sent her a text. "Hey, I'm here. Everything okay?" No response. Another 15 minutes passed. The sun was almost gone, and the clearing was getting darker. A chill started to creep up my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. Okay, this is weird, I muttered to myself. I decided to give it another few minutes, then head back to my car. Just as I was about to turn around, I heard a twig snap in the woods behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maya," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. A figure emerged from the trees. It was Maya, but she looked different. Her eyes, which had seemed so vibrant in her pictures, were now dull and lifeless. Her face was pale and gaunt, and her hair was tangled and matted. She was wearing a long, flowing dress that looked like it was made of some kind of rough, natural fiber. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, several other figures emerged from the woods. They were all women dressed in similar clothing, and they all had the same vacant look in their eyes. They moved slowly, silently, like they were in a trance. I took a step back, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? "Maya, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. She just stared at me with those empty eyes. Then she raised her hand and pointed at me. The other women started to move forward. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran back towards the trail, the sound of rustling leaves and soft footsteps behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I could hear the women gaining on me, their footsteps growing louder. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and hands on the rough ground. I scrambled back to my feet and kept running. Finally, I reached the trailhead and sprinted to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. I started the engine and slammed the car into reverse, peeling out of the parking lot. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city. I parked my car on a busy street and sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. The next day, I went to the police. I told them everything, but they were skeptical. They said there was no record of anyone named Maya living in the area, and they couldn't find any evidence of a cult or any missing women. They suggested that I might have had a bad dream or that I was exaggerating things. I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. And I knew that Maya and those women were out there, somewhere in the woods. I deleted my Tinder account, changed my phone number, and moved to a different state. I still have nightmares about those empty eyes and the silent figures emerging from the trees. I don't know what Maya was or what those women were doing in the woods. All I know is that I'll never trust a dating app again, and I'll never go hiking alone in the woods. Some connections are better left unmade, and some sunsets are best viewed from the safety of your own home. I've been to therapy. It barely helps. I feel like I got let in on a big secret I was never supposed to know, and it's always on my mind. I will never get close to another woman again. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now I will pay for it for the rest of my life. My heart still races when I remember the name Vernon. It's not a particularly scary name on its own, kind of old-fashioned and harmless sounding, really. But the man attached to that name, the experience of meeting him through Tinder, it's something I'm still trying to process even years later. I was in my early 20s living in a new city and swiping through Tinder just out of boredom and a desire to meet new people. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just casual dates and maybe some fun. Vernon's profile wasn't particularly exciting, but he seemed polite enough. He had a couple of pictures of himself hiking, one with a dog, and a bio that said he enjoyed art and good conversation. Basic, but inoffensive. We matched and started chatting. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking about my job, my hobbies, and what I was looking for in a partner. He wasn't overly flirty or pushy, which was a refreshing change from some of the other guys I'd matched with. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee. The coffee shop was a local place I'd been to a few times, so I felt comfortable meeting him there. When I saw him walk in, I was a little surprised. He was taller than he looked in his pictures, and his eyes were a little too intense for my liking. But I told myself I was being judgmental and tried to keep an open mind. The coffee date started out fine. We talked about our jobs, our families, and our interests. He was a good conversationalist, and I found myself laughing at some of his jokes. But as the date went on, his questions started to get a little strange. He asked about my past relationships, but not in a casual way. He wanted to know every detail, every fight, every heartbreak. He seemed particularly interested in the reasons why my previous relationships had ended. I started to feel a little uncomfortable, but I brushed it off as him just being curious. Then he started asking about my fears. Not just typical fears like spiders or heights, but deep personal fears. He wanted to know what kept me up at night, what made me feel vulnerable, what my biggest insecurities were. I tried to deflect the questions, but he was persistent. He kept probing, pushing until I reluctantly started to answer. As I talked about my fears, I noticed a strange look in his eyes. It was almost like he was enjoying my discomfort, like he was feeding off my vulnerability. It sent a shiver down my spine. I told him I had to go, making up some excuse about having an early meeting the next day. He didn't try to stop me, but as I walked away, I could feel his eyes on my back. When I got home, I immediately blocked him on Tinder and tried to forget about the date, but the feeling of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had revealed too much to a stranger, that I had opened myself up to someone who wasn't safe. A few days later, I started getting strange messages on social media. Anonymous accounts sending me cryptic messages, quoting things I had told Vernon on our date, things that no one else could have known. It was clear that he was behind it, that he was trying to scare me. I changed my social media settings to private, hoping to block him out. But the messages kept coming, finding their way through different platforms, different accounts. It was like he was everywhere, watching me, listening to me. One night, I was walking home from work when I noticed someone following me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. I started walking faster, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure in the distance, matching my pace. I broke into a run, desperate to get home. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock my apartment door. As I finally got the door open, I heard footsteps behind me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, just as someone reached for the handle. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. I told them everything that had happened about Vernon, about the messages, about the feeling of being watched. They took my statement, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I was terrified. I knew Vernon was stalking me, that he was trying to control me to scare me. I felt trapped, vulnerable, and alone. I started saying to friends, hoping that he would leave me alone if I wasn't in my apartment. But he kept finding me. He would leave notes on my car, send messages to my friends, even show up at places I frequented. It went on for months. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't function. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Vernon to make his next move. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to track Vernon down. It took a few weeks, but they were able to find him. He had moved to a different city, but he was still using Tinder, still preying on unsuspecting women. With the help of the private investigator, I was able to gather enough evidence to file a restraining order against Vernon. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to protect myself and other women from his abuse. The restraining order helped, but it didn't completely solve the problem. Vernon still found ways to harass me, to scare me, to remind me that he was out there. It's been years since I matched with Vernon on Tinder, but the experience still haunts me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the dangers of online dating. I'll never forget the name Vernon, or the lesson he taught me about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a seemingly harmless profile. It's a reminder that even in the age of digital connection, we have to be careful who we let into our lives, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we invite in ourselves. It started like any other conversation, but the way it ended still makes my stomach clench. I was fresh out of a long-term relationship, feeling a mix of freedom and loneliness, so naturally I downloaded Tinder. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some lighthearted distraction. Zachary seemed like a good option. His profile was filled with pictures of him traveling, volunteering, and generally looking like a well-adjusted, caring human being. He had a kind smile and an easygoing bio, so I swiped right. We matched almost immediately, and the conversation flowed easily. He was witty, intelligent, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our dream travel destinations. He wasn't pushy or overly complimentary, which I appreciated. After a week of chatting, he suggested we meet up for dinner. I checked his social media. Everything seemed normal, no red flags, so I agreed. We met at a trendy Italian restaurant in the city center. Zachary was even more attractive in person. He was charming and attentive, and the conversation continued to flow effortlessly. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, my dreams, and my fears. It was honestly one of the best first dates I'd ever had. As the night wound down, he walked me back to my apartment. He didn't try to kiss me or make any unwanted advances, which I found incredibly respectful. He simply gave me a warm hug and said he had a wonderful time. I felt a genuine spark, a connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Zachary and I became inseparable. We went on hikes, visited museums, and cooked dinner together. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: kind, intelligent, adventurous, and genuinely caring. I started to let myself fall for him, to imagine a future with him. Then things started to get weird. It started subtly. He began to ask more personal questions about my past, particularly about my previous relationship. He wanted to know every detail, every fight, every insecurity. He seemed fixated on the reasons why my relationship had ended. I initially chalked it up to him being interested in my life, but the questions became more frequent and more intense. He also started to become more possessive. He didn't like it when I made plans with other friends, and he would often try to guilt me into spending time with him instead. He started calling and texting me constantly, checking in on me throughout the day. At first, I found it endearing, but it soon became suffocating. One night, I was supposed to go out with my girlfriends for a birthday celebration. Zachary was visibly upset when I told him, and he tried to convince me to cancel. When I refused, he became cold and distant. He barely spoke to me the entire evening. The next morning, I woke up to find him standing in my bedroom. He had let himself in with a spare key that I had given him just in case a few weeks prior. I was startled and angry. I demanded to know why he was in my apartment without my permission. He simply smiled and said he wanted to surprise me with breakfast in bed. But the look in his eyes was unsettling, almost manic. I told him to leave, and he refused. He started yelling, accusing me of not caring about him, of prioritizing my friends over him. I was terrified. I had never seen him like this before. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. He grabbed my arm, his grip tightening. I screamed, and he finally released me. He stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door behind him. I immediately changed the locks and called the police. I told them everything that had happened about his possessiveness, his controlling behavior, and his unauthorized entry into my apartment. They took my statement and said they would investigate. Over the next few days, Zachary bombarded me with calls and texts, begging me to forgive him. He promised he would change, that he would never hurt me. I blocked his number and tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, I was walking home from work when I noticed someone following me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Zachary in the distance, his eyes fixed on me. I broke into a run, desperate to get home. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock my apartment door. As I finally got the door open, I felt a hand grab my arm. It was Zachary. He dragged me into my apartment, slamming the door behind him. I screamed and struggled, but he was too strong. He pinned me against the wall, his eyes filled with rage. He started yelling, accusing me of betraying him, of ruining his life. I was terrified. I knew I was in serious danger. I tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. He was completely consumed by his anger and jealousy. He said he couldn't live without me, and if he couldn't have me, no one could. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, he pulled out a knife. I froze, my blood running cold. I knew that this was it, that he was going to kill me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then I heard a loud banging on the door. It was the police. My neighbor had heard my screams and called them. Zachary panicked and dropped the knife. The police burst into the apartment and arrested him. I was shaken but alive. I pressed charges against Zachary, and he was eventually convicted of assault and stalking. He was sentenced to several years in prison. The experience was traumatic, and it took me a long time to recover. I still had nightmares about Zachary, the fear I felt in those moments. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the warning signs of a controlling and abusive partner. It started like any other conversation on Tinder, but it quickly turned into a nightmare that I'll never forget. It taught me that sometimes the people who seem the most charming and perfect are the ones you should be the most wary of. I wish I could forget what happened that day. The day I swiped right and unknowingly invited a nightmare into my life. I'd been on Tinder for a while, mostly just looking for some casual fun, maybe a dinner date here and there. I wasn't looking for the one, but I also wasn't opposed to meeting someone cool. Then I matched with Vincent. His profile was normal. He had a couple of decent pictures of him hiking, one with a dog, always a plus, right? And a bio that said he was an architect who loved exploring new places. He seemed nice enough in our initial chats. We talked about our favorite restaurants, our travel dreams, the usual getting to know you stuff. There were no immediate red flags, nothing that screamed serial killer or obsessive weirdo. We talked for about a week before he suggested meeting up. We settled on a coffee shop near my apartment. I texted my best friend, Sarah, the details just in case. Coffee with Vincent, I typed. If I don't text you by 8 p.m., send help lol. I even shared my location with her, just to be extra safe. The coffee date started out fine. Vincent was attractive in person, maybe even more so than his pictures. He was charming, held the conversation well, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for about an hour about our jobs, our families, and our hobbies. He seemed normal. But then he started asking about my apartment. Not in a creepy, what floor do you live on kind of way, but more subtly. He asked about the neighborhood, if I felt safe walking alone at night, if I had any roommates. I answered his questions honestly, maybe a little too honestly. I told him I lived alone on the 3rd floor, that the neighborhood was generally safe, but that I always carried pepper spray just in case. After coffee, he walked me back towards my apartment. As we were saying goodbye, he mentioned that he was working on a project nearby and asked if I'd be around later that week. I said maybe, not wanting to commit to anything just yet. He smiled, said he'd text me, and then walked away. That night, I got a text from Vincent. Had a great time today, it read. Maybe we can hang out at your place next time. I hesitated before responding. Something about the winky face felt a little too forward, a little too presumptuous. But I told myself I was probably just overreacting. Maybe. I texted back. The next few days were a blur of texts from Vincent. He texted me constantly, asking what I was doing, who I was with, and when I'd be free to see him again. At first, I found it flattering, but then it started to feel suffocating. I tried to brush it off, but his persistence was starting to unnerve me. I started to feel like I was being watched. One evening, I was walking home from work when I noticed a man standing across the street. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, even though it was already dark. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his posture seemed familiar. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. When I glanced back, the man was gone. That night, I had another text from Vincent. I saw you walking home from work today, it read. You looked beautiful. That was it. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I blocked Vincent's number immediately. I blocked him on Tinder, on Instagram, on every social media platform I could think of. I told Sarah everything that had happened, and she urged me to go to the police. I was hesitant. I didn't have any concrete evidence, just a feeling of unease. But Sarah insisted, and I reluctantly agreed. The police took my statement, but they couldn't do much without more information. They suggested I file a restraining order if Vincent continued to contact me. I started to feel paranoid. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped into my throat. Every time I walked down the street, I felt like I was being followed. I changed my routine, took different routes to work, and tried to stay inside as much as possible. A few days later, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening for any sign of movement inside. Silence. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was a mess. Drawers were pulled open, clothes were scattered on the floor, and furniture was overturned. It looked like someone had ransacked the place. I screamed and ran back out into the hallway, calling 911. The police arrived quickly and searched the apartment. They confirmed that it had been burglarized, but nothing seemed to be missing. It's like they were looking for something, one of the officers said. As I walked through my ransacked apartment with the police, I noticed something on my kitchen counter. It was a small white envelope with my name written on it in messy handwriting. I cautiously picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed. I didn't know how Vincent did it. How he found my apartment. How he got inside. I knew that he was watching me. That he was inside my head. That he would never leave me alone. I wish I could forget what happened that day, the day I swiped right on Vincent, because I'll never truly feel safe again. What I'm about to tell you is completely true, and it still keeps me up at night. I've never shared this with more than a couple of close friends, partly because it sounds insane, and partly because I still haven't fully processed it. Tinder had been a mixed bag for me, a few decent dates, a couple of awkward encounters, but mostly just a time waster. I was close to deleting the app altogether when I matched with Zena. Her profile was intriguing. Dark, moody photos, a lot of pictures taken in graveyards or abandoned buildings. Her bio was short and cryptic. Interested in the unseen. Seekers only. A bit much, maybe, but I was drawn to the mystery. I figured I'd give it one last shot. We started messaging, and she was unlike anyone I'd ever talked to. She wasn't interested in small talk. She wanted to know about my beliefs, my fears, my thoughts on the afterlife. She spoke about energy, vibrations, and unseen forces. It was way out there, but I found it weirdly captivating. I'm not usually one for the supernatural, but Zena had a way of making it sound plausible. After a week of intense messaging, we decided to meet. She suggested a walk in the woods at night. Red flag number one, I know, I was intrigued. We met at the trailhead, and even in the dim moonlight, Zena was striking. Pale skin, piercing eyes, and a long black coat that flowed around her as she moved. She had a presence that was both alluring and unsettling. We walked deeper into the woods, the only sound the crunch of leaves under our feet. Zena started talking about the history of the area, how it was once a sacred burial ground for a Native American tribe. She claimed the land was still imbued with their spirits, that if you listened closely, you could hear them. I was skeptical, of course, but the atmosphere was undeniably eerie. The woods felt different at night, more alive, more aware. Xena led me to a clearing where a circle of stones had been arranged on the ground. "This is a place of power," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We can connect with the other side here." She pulled out a small pouch from her coat and sprinkled a strange-smelling powder into the center of the circle. She started chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her voice growing louder and more intense. The air felt charged, like a static electricity was building up around us. I started to feel uneasy. This was going way beyond a casual date. I told Xena I wasn't sure about this, that maybe we should go. She ignored me, her eyes fixed on something beyond me. "They're here," she whispered. "They're listening." Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The temperature dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath in the air. The chanting was getting louder and more frantic, and Xena started swaying back and forth, her eyes rolling back in her head. Then things went completely off the rails. A voice, not Xena's, started coming from her mouth. It was deep, guttural, and malevolent. It spoke in the same unknown language, but this time I understood it. Not with my ears, but with my mind. It was a language of pure emotion, of fear, of pain, of hatred. The voice said my name. It knew things about me, things I had never told anyone. It spoke of my deepest insecurities, my hidden desires, my darkest secrets. It mocked me, it threatened me, it promised me power beyond my wildest dreams if I would only submit. I was terrified, paralyzed with fear. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Xena's body was convulsing, her face contorted in a grotesque mask. The voice was getting stronger, more insistent, and I felt like it was trying to crawl inside my head. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The wind died down, the temperature returned to normal, and the voice was gone. Xena collapsed to the ground, unconscious. I didn't know what to do. I was still shaken to my core, barely able to breathe. I considered leaving her there, running as far as I could and never looking back, but something compelled me to stay. I managed to hoist her onto my back and stumbled out of the woods, carrying her back to my car. I drove her back to her apartment, laid her on her couch, and left without a word. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what had happened. I never saw Xena again, and I never tried to contact her. I deleted Tinder, blocked her number, and tried to forget the whole thing. But I couldn't. The voice, the woods, the chanting, it was all burned into my memory. For months, I was plagued by nightmares. I would wake up screaming, convinced that the voice was still there, watching me, waiting for me. I started seeing a therapist who told me it was just a hallucination, a product of stress and anxiety. But I knew it was more than that. A few years later, I was browsing the internet and stumbled across a website about ancient religions and occult practices. I saw a symbol that looked familiar, a symbol that Xena had drawn in the dirt before she started chanting. I clicked on it and read about a demonic entity that was said to grant power and knowledge to those who summoned it. The entity's name was the same name the voice had called me in the woods. That's when I realized what had happened that night. Xena wasn't just interested in the unseen. She was actively trying to contact it, and she had used me as a vessel, a conduit for her dark rituals. I don't know what she wanted from me or what would have happened if I had submitted to the voice, but I know that I narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe that there are forces in this world that are beyond our comprehension, forces that we should never try to meddle with. And I know that sometimes the scariest things are found in the most innocuous of places, like Tinder. It was probably not smart to meet up with her after the disturbing first chats, but something was pulling me toward her. I believe if I hadn't gone, something worse would have occurred. Maybe that's what she wanted from me. This is a true story that still haunts me. I never thought I'd be telling a Tinder horror story, mostly because I considered myself a pretty level-headed guy. I wasn't expecting to find my soulmate on a dating app, but I figured it was a decent way to meet new people, maybe grab a few casual drinks, and see where things went. I was wrong. So wrong. It all started with Riley. Her profile was pretty standard, a few cute selfies, a picture of her hiking, and a bio that said something about loving dogs and craft beer. We matched, and her first message was witty and engaging, not the generic, "hey, you usually get," We talked for a few days, and I actually enjoyed our conversations. She was smart, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We decided to meet up for coffee. She suggested a small cafe I hadn't been to before, a little off the beaten path. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked even better in person. She had this infectious smile and bright eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. The coffee date went great. We talked for hours about everything from our families to our career aspirations. There weren't any awkward silences, no forced conversation. It felt natural and easy. We even made plans for a second date, a hike in the mountains. I was actually excited. I hadn't felt this way about someone in a long time. The hike was even better than the coffee date. The scenery was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and Riley was even more engaging. We reached the summit and sat down to enjoy the view, sharing stories and laughing. It felt like something out of a movie. That's when things started to get weird. Riley started asking me about my past relationships, specifically about my ex-girlfriend, Sarah. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured she was curious, but the questions became more and more specific, almost obsessive. She wanted to know everything about Sarah, what she looked like, what she did for a living, even what kind of car she drove. I started to feel uneasy. I tried to change the subject, but Riley kept bringing it back to Sarah. She asked if I still thought about her, if I missed her. I told her that Sarah was in the past, that I was over her, but Riley didn't seem convinced. She kept pressing, digging deeper and deeper into my past. As the sun began to set, Riley's demeanor shifted. Her smile faded and her eyes became cold and distant. She stopped talking and stared out at the horizon, her expression unreadable. The silence was deafening. I asked her if she was okay, but she didn't respond. I reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched away from me. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a strange, unsettling intensity. "You still love her, don't you?" She said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't thought about Sarah in months, but Riley's question made me question everything. Did I still have feelings for her? Was I just lying to myself? Before I could answer, Riley stood up and started walking away towards the edge of the cliff. "Riley, where are you going?" I called out, but she didn't stop. I ran after her, grabbing her arm just as she reached the edge. She turned to me and her eyes filled with tears. "Let me go," she said, her voice trembling. "No, Riley, what's going on?" "Talk to me," I pleaded. She looked at me, and her expression a mix of sadness and anger. "You don't understand," she said. "I can't be with someone who's still in love with someone else." And then she did something I'll never forget. She smiled. Not the warm, infectious smile I'd seen earlier, but a cold, twisted smile that sent shivers down my spine. "If I can't have you," she whispered, "then no one can." She tried to pull away from me, to jump off the cliff, but I held on tight. We struggled for what felt like an eternity, both of us teetering on the edge. Finally, I managed to pull her back to safety. I held her in my arms, trying to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over again. "If I can't have you, no one can." I knew I had to get her help. I called the police, and they arrived a short time later. They took Riley into custody, and I gave them my statement. I later learned that Riley had a history of mental illness and had been stalking Sarah for years. She had somehow found my Tinder profile and targeted me specifically because of my connection to Sarah. I was horrified. I couldn't believe that I had been so naive, so blind to the red flags. I had almost lost my life because of a dating app. I haven't used Tinder since that day. I'm still struggling to process what happened, to make sense of the whole experience. I know I was lucky to escape with my life, but the memory of Riley's twisted smile will haunt me forever. I wish I could forget what happened that day, the day I swiped right and unknowingly opened a door to something I still can't fully comprehend. I mean, Tinder, right? It's supposed to be a hookup app, a way to meet new people, maybe find a date. You expect a little awkwardness, maybe a bad conversation, but not this. I was in a rut, recently single, and thought, what the hell, let's see what's out there. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some company. I swiped through the usual profiles, the gym selfies, the travel pics, the girls holding puppies. Then I saw Petra's profile. Her pictures were different. Not professionally done, just natural. A candid shot of her laughing with a friend, one of her hiking in the mountains, another of her reading a book in a coffee shop. She seemed normal. Her bio was simple, looking for interesting conversations and maybe some adventures. Seemed harmless enough. We matched, and I messaged her. The conversation was easy, flowing. She was smart, funny, and genuinely seemed interested in what I had to say. We talked about everything: movies, music, our families, our dreams for the future. It was refreshing, actually. I hadn't had a conversation like that in a long time. After a few days of texting, we decided to meet up. She suggested a small local bar that I hadn't been to before. It was a cozy place dimly lit with a good selection of craft beers. I was actually looking forward to it. When I saw her, she looked even better in person. Her eyes were bright and her smile was genuine. We hugged, and I instantly felt comfortable around her. The conversation was even better in person than it had been over text. We laughed, we shared stories, and we just clicked. We spent hours at the bar talking until it closed. When we finally left, I walked her to her car. We hugged again, and she said she had a great time. I did too. We made plans to see each other again soon. The next few weeks were great. We went on dates, explored the city, and just spent time together. I was starting to develop real feelings for her. I know it sounds crazy, meeting someone on Tinder and actually connecting, but it was happening. Then things started to change. Subtle at first, but definitely noticeable. She started being more secretive about where she was going and what she was doing. She would disappear for hours, sometimes days, without explanation. When I asked her about it, she would brush it off, saying she was just busy with work or spending time with friends. I tried to be understanding, but it was hard. I started to feel like she was pulling away. I also started to notice strange things about her. She always wore long sleeves, even in warm weather. When I asked her why, she said she was just always cold. I also noticed she never talked about her family. When I brought it up, she would change the subject. One night, we were at my place watching a movie. She fell asleep on the couch, and I decided to go to the kitchen to grab some water. As I was walking back, I noticed her purse was open on the coffee table. I know I shouldn't have, but I was curious. I glanced inside. That's when I saw it. A small, antique-looking knife with a bone handle. It was tucked away in a side pocket, almost hidden. I felt the chill run down my spine. Why would she have that? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When she woke up, I tried to act normal. I didn't want to confront her about the knife without knowing more. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to do some digging. I started by searching her name online. That's when I found the article. An old news story from several years ago about a series of unsolved disappearances in a nearby town. All the victims were young men, and they had all been found murdered, their bodies mutilated. The article mentioned the suspect, a young woman who had been seen with several of the victims before they disappeared. Her name was Petra. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I looked at the picture of her in the article. It was her, but different. Her eyes were cold, and her smile was sinister. I couldn't believe it. I was dating a suspected serial killer. I knew I had to get out. I couldn't stay in the same room with her. I made an excuse that I had to go to work early. She seemed disappointed but didn't argue. I walked her to her car, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing. As she was getting in her car, I noticed something in the back seat, a large duffel bag. You won't believe what happened to me last summer. Seriously, it still feels like some twisted movie plot, not something that actually happened in my life. I was between jobs, feeling a bit lost and restless, so I did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I reactivated my Tinder profile. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some casual dates to break up the monotony of job hunting. That's my match with Phil. He seemed different. Not in a bad way, at least not initially. His profile was full of artsy black and white photos, and his bio was all about existentialism and finding meaning in a meaningless world. A bit pretentious, maybe, but also intriguing. We started chatting, and he was surprisingly engaging. He didn't do the usual hey or wide thing. He asked me about my dreams, my fears, and my perspective on the universe. It was deep, philosophical stuff, and honestly, I was kind of into it. After a week of intense texting, he suggested we meet up. He didn't want to do the typical dinner or drinks thing. Instead, he proposed a hike in a secluded state park about an hour outside the city. I hesitated. It seemed a little adventurous for a first date, but he was so persuasive, and the idea of escaping the city sounded so appealing that I agreed. The day of the hike, I was a little nervous. I made sure to tell a few friends where I was going and who I was meeting, just in case. I even shared my location with them. When Phil arrived to pick me up, he was exactly as I pictured him. Tall, lanky, with intense eyes and a brooding expression. He was wearing all black, which seemed a bit much for a hike, but I didn't say anything. The drive to the park was mostly silent. Phil had this intense, almost unsettling focus. He seemed lost in thought, and I didn't want to interrupt him. When we arrived at the park, it was even more secluded than I had anticipated. There were hardly any other cars in the parking lot, and the trail we chose was narrow and overgrown. The hike started off okay. We talked a bit, mostly about nature and philosophy. He was still engaging and intelligent, but there was an undercurrent of something off. He kept staring at me, not in a flirty way, but in a way that made me feel like I was being analyzed. As we hiked deeper into the woods, the trail became steeper and more treacherous. The sunlight was filtered by the dense trees, creating an eerie, almost claustrophobic atmosphere. I started to feel uneasy. I told Phil I wanted to turn back, but he insisted we keep going. He said there was a beautiful overlook just a little further ahead. I reluctantly agreed, but my anxiety was growing with each step. The trail was now barely visible, and the woods were eerily silent. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, Phil stopped. He turned to me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I have something to show you," he said, his voice low and intense. He led me off the trail deeper into the woods. I protested, but he ignored me. He pulled me along, his grip tightening on my arm. I was starting to panic. I knew I had made a mistake. We reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a makeshift altar, constructed from stones and branches. On the altar were several bizarre objects: animal bones, feathers, and a small, crudely carved wooden doll. I was horrified. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Phil smiled, a chilling, unsettling smile. "This is where I connect with the universe," he said, "where I find true meaning." He started to chant something in a language I didn't understand. It was low and guttural, and it sent shivers down my spine. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm again, his grip like a vice. "You're going to help me," he said, his eyes now completely devoid of emotion. "You're going to help me find enlightenment." I was terrified. I knew I had to get away from him, but I was trapped. We were miles from civilization, deep in the woods. I was alone with a man who was clearly deranged. I tried to reason with him to appeal to his humanity, but it was no use. He was completely lost in his own twisted reality. He started to drag me towards the altar. I fought back, kicking and screaming, but he was too strong. He threw me onto the altar, pinning me down. He pulled out a knife. I screamed, begging him to stop, but he just smiled and raised the knife above me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then I heard a noise, a rustling in the bushes. Phil froze, his eyes widening in surprise. A dog burst out of the woods, barking furiously. It was a large, muscular dog, clearly trained to protect. It lunged at Phil, knocking him off me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran as fast as I could back towards the trail, back towards civilization. I could hear Phil yelling behind me, but I didn't stop. I finally reached the trail and ran till I saw the parking lot. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The dog followed me out of the woods. It was panting and exhausted, but it stayed by my side, protecting me. I have no idea where it came from, but I'm convinced it saved my life. I called the police, and they arrived a short time later. They searched the woods for Phil, but he was gone. They never found him. I gave them my statement, and they launched an investigation. They discovered that Phil had a history of mental illness and had been involved in several bizarre incidents in the past. He was considered a danger to the public. I never heard from Phil again, but I'll never forget that day in the woods. It was the scariest experience of my life. I learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of online dating and the importance of trusting my instincts. I still have nightmares about the altar, the knife, and Phil's chilling smile. But I also remember the dog, the unexpected savior who appeared out of nowhere to rescue me. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, there is always hope. I haven't been on a date since, Maybe someday I will, but for now, I'm content to stay safe and sound, far away from the dark corners of the internet. And you better believe I'm adopting a dog, a big one. I never felt unsafe until that moment when I realized I couldn't remember how long Grace had been standing there, just inside the doorway of my apartment, not saying a word. I'd swiped around her profile a week or so before. She was cute, not like model gorgeous, but cute in a way that felt approachable. Messy brown hair, kind of nerdy glasses, a bio that mentioned a shared love of obscure horror movies. We chatted for a few days, and the conversation flowed easily. We had a lot in common, or so I thought. I'm not usually one for the whole dinner and a movie first date thing. It always feels forced. I suggested she come over to my place, watch a movie, order some pizza, keep it casual. Stupid, I know. Hindsight is a real bitch. She arrived right on time, carrying a bottle of wine and a shy smile. We settled in, put on some dumb slasher flick I'd seen a million times, and started talking. The conversation was good, maybe even too good. She seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, asked thoughtful questions, and laughed at all my jokes. It was easy, too easy. We got through the first bottle of wine pretty quickly, and I opened another. We were both getting a little tipsy, but nothing too crazy. Then, about halfway through the movie, things started to get weird. She started staring at me. Not in a flirty way, but in a calculating way. Like she was trying to figure something out. I tried to ignore it, chalked it up to the wine, but it kept happening. Every time I looked over at her, she was staring, her eyes intense and unblinking. I started feeling uneasy. The easy vibe from before had vanished, replaced by a low-grade dread that settled in my stomach. I paused the movie, hoping to break the tension. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't answer, just kept staring. "Grace," I said a little louder this time. She blinked slowly, then a weird smile spread across her face. "Everything's perfect," she said, her voice sounding different, almost robotic. That's when she got up and walked over to the doorway, just stood there, looking out into the hallway. I asked her what she was doing, but she didn't respond. I got up to get a closer look. She had taken a step inside when I stood up. Her frame was silhouetted by the light coming from outside. But standing just inside the doorway, facing away from me, not saying a word, it really started to freak me out. I stood up and walked closer when I realized I had no idea how long she had been standing there. "Grace, come on, you're creeping me out," I said, trying to laugh it off, but my voice was shaking. She turned around slowly, and that's when I saw it. Her eyes. They were completely black. Not just dark, but completely devoid of any color, like two empty voids staring back at me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. She took a step toward me, and a voice, not her voice, but a deep, guttural voice, echoed from her throat. "You shouldn't have swiped right," it said. Then she lunged. I don't remember exactly what happened next. It's all a blur of adrenaline and terror. I remember pushing her away, stumbling backward, tripping over the coffee table. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a heavy glass ashtray, and holding it up in front of me like a shield. She kept coming, her movements unnaturally fast, her eyes still black and empty. I swung the ashtray, hitting her in the side of the head. She stumbled but didn't fall. She just kept coming. I managed to get to the door, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the key. I finally got it open and bolted out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing. No sign of Grace, no sign of a struggle, nothing out of the ordinary. It took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They probably thought I was drunk or high or just plain crazy. I haven't been back to my apartment since. I'm staying with a friend, trying to piece together what happened. Was it a hallucination? A nightmare? Some kind of psychotic break? I don't know. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that Grace wasn't Grace. I deleted Tinder. I deleted all my dating apps. I don't think I'll ever swipe right again. The thought of meeting someone new, of inviting a stranger into my life, fills me with a terror I can't describe. Some connections are best left unmade. Some doors are best left unopened. and some swipes. Some swipes can lead you straight to hell. I'm still trying to understand why she was there, or more accurately, what was inside her. I'm still trying to grapple with the fact that that woman's silhouette still haunts me when I try and sleep. I'm still trying to figure out why her and why me. I never felt unsafe until that moment when I realized the monster had been inside all along. My heart still races when I remember the Tinder match that almost cost me everything. I was in my late 20s living in a new city, and honestly, a little lonely. Swiping through Tinder felt like a harmless way to meet people, maybe go on a few dates, and hopefully find someone I clicked with. Wayne seemed like a good candidate at first. His profile had the usual outdoorsy pictures: hiking, camping, standing next to a lake with a fishing rod. He seemed down to earth, and his bio mentioned a love for dogs and old movies, two things I definitely appreciated. We matched and started chatting, and he was charming, attentive, and surprisingly funny. He wasn't pushy or overly sexual, which was a refreshing change from a lot of the guys on there. We talked about everything from our families to our favorite books. After a week or so of chatting, he suggested we meet up for dinner. I hesitated, I always do, but he seemed genuinely nice, and I figured what could go wrong. I told a friend where I was going and who I was meeting, just in case. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Wayne was taller than I expected, with a kind smile, a genuine warmth that immediately put me at ease. The dinner was actually really enjoyable. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I found myself really liking him. But as the evening wore on, some small things started to feel off. He asked a lot of questions about my apartment, my security system, or lack thereof, and whether I lived alone. I brushed it off as friendly curiosity, but a little seed of unease started to sprout in my mind. After dinner, he walked me back to my apartment. When we got to my door, he lingered, suggesting we watch a movie inside. I politely declined, saying I had an early morning. He seemed a little disappointed, but didn't push it. He gave me a hug, a little too tight, and then finally left. I went inside, locked the door, and immediately texted my friend that I was home safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I chalked it up to first date jitters. The next few days were filled with texts and calls from Wayne. He was eager to see me again, suggesting all sorts of activities. I was hesitant, but also didn't want to overreact. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I agreed to go on another date, a walk in the park. The walk was pleasant enough, but the questions about my personal life continued. He asked about my work schedule, my daily routine, and who I spent time with. It felt less like friendly conversation and more like an interrogation. I started to feel really uncomfortable. As we were walking, he stopped suddenly and grabbed my hand. "I really like you," he said, his eyes intense. "I think we could have something special." I wasn't sure how to respond. I didn't feel the same way. "Wayne, I appreciate that, but I think I need to take things slow," I said, trying to be gentle. His expression changed. The warmth in his eyes disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight. "Don't you like me?" I stammered, trying to explain that I wasn't sure, that I needed more time. He cut me off. "You're playing games," he said, his grip on my hand tightening. "I don't like games." I tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. "Wayne, you're hurting me," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't release my hand. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "I'm not going to let you go," he whispered. "You're mine now." I was terrified. I knew I had to get away from him. I took a deep breath and stomped on his foot as hard as I could. He yelped and released my hand. I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the park entrance. I could hear him yelling behind me, but I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. I locked the doors and drove straight to the police station. I reported the incident, telling them everything that had happened. They took my statement and said they would look into it. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the day in my head, wondering how I could have been so wrong about someone. I checked all locks on my doors and windows, feeling like I was living in a horror movie. The next morning, I woke up to a series of missed calls and text messages from Wayne. The texts were increasingly disturbing, ranging from desperate pleas to angry threats. I blocked his number and called the police again. They told me they had been trying to locate Wayne, but hadn't been able to find him. They advised me to stay with a friend or family member and to be extra cautious. I spent the next few weeks living in fear. I stayed at my friend's apartment, afraid to go back to my own place. The police eventually found Wayne, but he had left the state. They issued a warrant for his arrest, but I never heard if they caught him. To this day, I still look over my shoulder. I'm more cautious about who I meet online, and I always trust my gut instincts. That Tinder match taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most charming people are the most dangerous. And sometimes a harmless swipe can turn into a real-life nightmare. The thought of what could have happened if I didn't listen to my instincts is a constant reminder that being safe is always better than being sorry. I'm just grateful to be alive and able to share my story, hoping it might help someone else avoid a similar experience. I thought I was being paranoid until the flowers arrived. Not a romantic bouquet, but a single wilting sunflower left on my doorstep. Before that, it was just a feeling, a prickling unease that I couldn't quite place. Tinder hadn't been kind to me lately, a string of bad dates and awkward encounters. At Jack's, however, seemed different, at least at first. We matched a few weeks ago, and his profile was quirky. He had pictures of himself dressed up in Renaissance garb, posing the falcons, and one where he was juggling flaming torches. I figured he was an artsy type, maybe a little eccentric, but harmless. His bio said he was a seeker of knowledge and lover of all things historical. I swiped right, thinking it would be an interesting change of pace from the usual gem selfies and generic bios. Our conversations were definitely unique. He didn't ask the standard questions about my job or my hobbies. Instead, he wanted to know about my dreams, my fears, and my deepest secrets. He spoke in riddles and metaphors, often quoting obscure historical figures. It was a bit much, but I was intrigued. We met for coffee. Ajax was tall and lanky, with intense, piercing eyes. He wore a velvet jacket and carried a worn, leather-bound book. He launched into a monologue about alchemy and the philosopher's stone within 5 minutes of sitting down. I tried to steer the conversation towards more normal topics, but he always circled back to esoteric subjects. I chalked it up to a bad date and didn't expect to hear from him again. But he texted me that night, thanking me for my time and saying he felt a deep connection with me. I politely replied, saying I enjoyed the conversation but wasn't sure we were a good match. I thought that would be the end of it. Then the gifts started. First, it was a small antique music box left on my doorstep. It played a haunting melody that I couldn't quite place. Then came a collection of dried herbs and a handwritten note in archaic English. The note spoke of ancient knowledge and unlocking hidden potential. I started to feel seriously creeped out. I blocked Ajax on Tinder and his number, but the gifts kept coming. A feather, a piece of amber, a small clay figurine, each item more unsettling than the last. I started to feel like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of someone lurking in the shadows outside my apartment, but when I looked closer, they were always gone. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. The gifts weren't threatening, and I didn't have any proof that Ajax was the one sending them. They told me to document everything and call them if anything escalated. That's when the sunflower arrived. It was lying on my doorstep when I opened the door one morning. A single wilting sunflower with a note attached. This time, the note wasn't cryptic or poetic. It was a simple, chilling message. I know where you sleep. That was it. The line had been crossed. I ran back inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and called the police again. This time, they took me seriously. They sent a patrol car to my apartment and started an investigation. They questioned Ed Jax, but he denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen me since our coffee date and had no idea who was sending the gifts. He even produced an alibi for the times when the gifts were delivered. The police couldn't prove anything, so they had to let him go. But I knew it was him. I could feel it in my bones. I started to take precautions. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, and started carrying pepper spray. I told my friends and family about what was happening, and they all offered their support. I tried to stay strong, but I was terrified. One night, I woke up to a strange noise outside my apartment. It sounded like someone was digging in the garden below my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw a figure kneeling in the flower bed. It was Jax. He was wearing Renaissance garb and holding a shovel. I screamed and ran to the phone, calling 911. But then I hesitated. What if he was gone by the time the police arrived? What if he escalated things even further? I decided to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and quietly crept down the stairs. I opened the back door and stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. Jax was still digging in the flower bed, muttering to himself. Jax, I shouted, my voice trembling. He jumped and turned around, his eyes wide with surprise. I just wanted to plant a seed, he said, his voice soft and pleading. Get away from my apartment, I said, raising the baseball bat, and don't ever come near me again. He stared at me for a moment, then slowly stood up and walked away. I watched him until he disappeared into the darkness. Then I ran back inside and waited for the police to arrive. Jax was eventually arrested for trespassing and stalking. He was given a restraining order, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. But I still think about him sometimes, wondering what he was digging for in my garden, and I still get a shiver down my spine every time I see a sunflower. It reminds me of how easily a harmless swipe on a dating app can turn into a real-life nightmare. I thought I was being paranoid until that sunflower arrived, and I knew that I was in true danger. I never thought I'd be sharing this story. It's the kind of thing you read about online and scoff at, thinking that would never happen to me. But it did. It happened to me. And honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It started like so many regrettable things these days with a Tinder match. Her name was Hazel. Her profile was pretty standard. A few selfies, a picture with her friends, a bio that said she was looking for fun and loved adventures. She was attractive, sure, but what caught my eye was her smile. It seemed genuine and warm. I swiped right. We matched almost instantly. She messaged me first. Hey there, she wrote. What kind of adventures are you into? We chatted for a few days, mostly about travel, hiking, and our favorite books. She seemed intelligent, witty, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. There weren't any red flags, no weird vibes. Just normal, pleasant conversation. We decided to meet for a drink at a local brewery. I picked a spot I knew was usually pretty crowded, just to be safe. I'd heard enough Tinder horror stories to be cautious. I texted a buddy of mine the details of our date just in case things went south. Hazel was even more attractive in person. She had this infectious energy about her that made me feel instantly comfortable. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. The conversation flowed effortlessly. It felt easy. Too easy, maybe. After a few drinks, she suggested we go back to her place. She lived in a loft downtown, not too far from the brewery. I hesitated for a moment. It felt a little fast, but I was enjoying her company and I figured why not. Her loft was cool, minimalist with exposed brick walls and high ceilings. She had a huge collection of vinyl records and a vintage record player. We put on some music, poured another drink, and started dancing. That's when things started to get weird. Hazel started talking about her past. She told me about a previous relationship that had ended badly. She said her ex had been abusive and controlling, that he had tried to isolate her from her friends and family. She spoke with a raw intensity that made me uncomfortable. I tried to change the subject, but she kept circling back to her ex. She started crying, saying she was still haunted by the things he had done to her. I felt bad for her, but I also felt like I was getting a little more than I signed up for. Then she started talking about revenge. She said she wanted to make her ex pay for what he had done to her. She said she had been planning her revenge for months, meticulously plotting every detail. Her eyes were wide, her voice low and menacing. I was starting to get seriously freaked out. I told her I had to go, that I had an early morning. She seemed disappointed, but didn't try to stop me. I walked towards the door, but she grabbed my arm. You can help me, she said, her grip tightening. You can help me get my revenge. I pulled my arm away and back towards the door. I don't want to be involved in anything like that, I said. I'm just going to go. She stepped in front of me, blocking the door. You'll understand, she said. He deserves it. He ruined my life. I tried to reason with her to calm her down, but she wasn't listening. She was completely consumed by her anger and her desire for revenge. I realized I was in a dangerous situation. I saw an opportunity to escape when she turned her head to look at something on the wall. I shoved past her and ran out the door, down the stairs, and into the street. I didn't stop running until I was a few blocks away. I called a cab and went straight home. I locked all the doors and windows and didn't sleep a wink that night. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. I told them everything about the Tinder match, the date, and Hazel's disturbing talk about revenge. They said they would look into it, but they couldn't do much without more evidence. I blocked Hazel's number and deleted her from all my social media accounts. I hoped that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A few weeks later, I started receiving strange phone calls. The caller ID was blocked, and when I answered, there was only silence. Then came the emails. Anonymous messages filled with threats and accusations. They were clearly from Hazel. I went back to the police, but they still couldn't do anything. They said it was difficult to trace the calls and emails without a warrant. I felt helpless, vulnerable. One evening, I was walking home from work when I noticed someone following me. I quickened my pace, but they kept up with me. I glanced back and saw Hazel. She was wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses, but I recognized her instantly. I panicked and ran to a nearby store. I hid in the back until I was sure she was gone. I was terrified. I knew she was escalating things, that she was getting closer. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to track Hazel down and gather evidence against her. It cost me a fortune, but I felt that I had no other choice. The investigator found out that Hazel's ex had recently moved to another state. He'd also discovered that Hazel had a history of mental illness and had been hospitalized several times. Armed with this information, I went back to the police. This time they took me seriously. They obtained a warrant and arrested Hazel. She was charged with stalking and harassment. She eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to probation and mandatory therapy. I haven't seen or heard from her since, but I'm still haunted by what happened. I'm more cautious about who I meet online, more aware of the potential dangers that lurk beneath the surface. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I hope it serves as a warning to others. Be careful who you meet online, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you feel like you're in danger. Tinder can be fun, but it can also lead you down a dark and dangerous path, one I'm lucky to have survived. This experience changed how I view online dating, and honestly, how I view safety in general. I was fresh out of a messy breakup, and my friends convinced me to download Tinder, just for fun. They said, "Get back out there," they cheered. So reluctantly, I swiped, and that's my match with Anthony. He seemed normal, attractive, decent job, similar interests listed in his bio. We chatted for a few days, and he was funny, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We bonded over our love of hiking and indie music. He suggested we meet up for a hike that weekend, and I thought, why not? It was a public place, broad daylight, what could go wrong? I told a few friends about the date, sent them his picture, and shared my location. I even made a joke about sending a search party if I didn't text them by a certain time. Naive, I know, but I really thought I had done my due diligence. The morning of the hike, I was actually excited. It felt good to be doing something for myself, stepping outside my comfort zone. Anthony suggested a trail just outside the city, one he said had amazing views. When he pulled up to my apartment, he was exactly as he looked in his pictures, maybe even a little more handsome. He had this easygoing charm that put me at ease. The hike started out great. The weather was perfect, the scenery was beautiful, and Anthony was engaging. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing and sharing stories. He seemed genuinely nice, and I started to think maybe this whole Tinder thing wasn't so bad after all. About an hour into the hike, he suggested we veer off the main trail and explore a more secluded path. He said it led to an even better viewpoint. I hesitated for a moment. The main trail was clearly marked and well-traveled, but this side path was overgrown and looked barely used. He reassured me, saying he had hiked it before, and it was perfectly safe. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That's when the atmosphere shifted. As soon as we stepped onto the secluded path, Anthony's demeanor changed. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The easygoing charm seemed to vanish, replaced by a strange intensity. The path grew steeper and more treacherous, and the trees closed in around us, blocking out the sunlight. I started to feel uneasy. I asked him how much further it was to the viewpoint, but he just shrugged and kept walking, his pace quickening. I had to struggle to keep up. The path twisted and turned, and I quickly lost my sense of direction. I realized we were completely isolated, surrounded by dense forest. Then he stopped abruptly. He turned to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You know," he said, his voice low and husky, "I've been watching you for a while." My blood ran cold. Watching me? What did that even mean? He took a step closer, and I instinctively recoiled. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smirked. "I've been seeing your posts, your pictures. I know where you live, where you work, who your friends are." I felt a wave of panic wash over me. He had been stalking me. This wasn't a date. This was a trap. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't try to run," he said, his voice now menacing. "It'll only make things worse." I was terrified. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how. I tried to pull away from him, but he wouldn't let go. He started rambling about how I was special, how we were meant to be together, how he was the only one who truly understood me. It was the kind of crazy stalker talk you see in movies, but it was happening to me in real life. I realized I had to fight. I couldn't let him control me. I took a deep breath and kicked him as hard as I could in the shin. He yelped in pain and loosened his grip, giving me just enough time to break free. I turned and ran, sprinting back down the path as fast as I could. I could hear him behind me, yelling and cursing. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I finally burst back onto the main trail, gasping for air. There were other hikers nearby, and I ran towards them, screaming for help. Anthony stopped chasing me. He melted back into the forest and vanished. The other hikers helped me call the police, who arrived a short time later. I gave them a description of Anthony and told them everything that had happened. They searched the area, but they couldn't find him. The police took me back to the station, where I gave a statement. They took it seriously, but they also warned me that it might be difficult to find him. I only knew his first name and a few details from his Tinder profile, which he had likely fabricated. I spent the next few weeks living in a state of constant fear. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and avoided going out alone. I deleted all my social media accounts and went into hiding. The police eventually identified Anthony, and it turned out he had a history of stalking and harassment. They issued a warrant for his arrest, but he disappeared. To this date, he hasn't been found. I still think about him sometimes, wondering if he's still out there, watching me. I'll never forget the fear I felt that day on the trail, the realization that someone I thought I knew could be capable of such violence. This experience taught me a harsh lesson about the dangers of online dating and the importance of trusting my instincts. I'm much more cautious now, much more aware of my surroundings. I'll never be as Nate as I was before, and I'll definitely never go on a hike with a Tinder match again. I'd never felt unsafe until that moment when I saw Iris standing across the street from my apartment, 3 weeks after I unmatched her on Tinder. Before that, she just seemed intense. Maybe a little too into me, too soon, but I chalked it up to excitement. I mean, I'm not a bad-looking dude, and I've had a decent career going. I figured she was just really feeling the connection. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started like any other Tinder story. Swipe right, match, exchange a few messages. Iris was beautiful, no doubt. Striking eyes, dark hair, a smile that could melt glaciers. Her profile said she was a freelance photographer, liked hiking, and was looking for someone genuine, seemed legit. Our first date was at a brewery downtown. She was even more stunning in person, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our families. She seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Things moved fast, really fast. At the end of the first date, she was already talking about how great we were together, how she could see a future with me. I was flattered, sure, but also a little weirded out. It felt like she was rushing things. Still, I was enjoying the attention, and she was definitely attractive. I figured I'd just go with the flow and see where it led. We went on a few more dates over the next week. Movies, dinners, walks in the park. She was always available, always eager to spend time with me. But the intensity kept ramping up. She started texting me constantly throughout the day, wanting to know what I was doing, who I was with. She'd get jealous if I didn't respond immediately. She started calling me pet names after only knowing me for a week. My love and baby were thrown around way too much. Then came the gifts. A framed photo of us from our second date, which I'm pretty sure she took without me noticing. A hand-knitted scarf, it was July, and a collection of vintage records she somehow knew were my favorite. It was sweet, I guessed, but also overwhelming. It felt like she was trying to buy my affection. I found it hard to breathe. The final straw was when she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was working from home that day and I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, holding a bouquet of flowers and a homemade lasagna. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, smiling sweetly. I was polite, but I told her that I needed some space, that things were moving too fast for me. I said I wasn't ready for a serious relationship right now. Her smile faded. Her eyes turned cold. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying I think we should see other people," I replied, trying to be gentle. Her face contorted with anger. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice rising. "I thought we had something special." "I'm sorry, Iris, but I don't feel the same way," I said, trying to remain calm. She threw the flowers and the lasagna on the ground. "You'll regret this," she spat before storming off. I closed the door and locked it, feeling a mix of relief and unease. I knew I had made the right decision, but I also had a feeling I hadn't seen the last of her. I had matched her on Tinder and blocked her number. I hoped that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. For the next few weeks, I kept getting calls from unknown numbers. I'd answer, but there would be silence on the other end. I started noticing things out of place around my apartment. A window slightly ajar, a book moved from the shelf, a strange smell in the air. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Then came the night I saw her across the street. I was walking home from work, and as I turned the corner onto my block, I saw her. She was standing under a streetlight, her face obscured by shadows, but I knew it was her. She was staring directly at my apartment building. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. She saw me. Her eyes locked on mine. She didn't move, didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching me. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I was frozen. After what felt like an eternity, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I ran to my apartment, locked the door, and called the police. I told them everything that had happened about Iris, about the strange calls, about seeing her across the street. They took my statement and said they would patrol the area more frequently. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of my apartment building sent shivers down my spine. I kept imagining Iris lurking outside watching me. The next day, I installed security cameras around my apartment. I also bought a can of pepper spray and started taking self-defense classes. I wasn't going to be a victim. A few days later, I checked the security camera footage and saw something that made my blood run cold. Iris had been back. She had stood outside my apartment for hours, just watching. The video quality wasn't great, but I could see her face clearly. Her eyes were filled with a chilling emptiness. I showed the footage to the police. They finally took me seriously. They issued a restraining order against Iris and started actively searching for her. I moved out of my apartment that week. I couldn't stay there any longer. The thought of Iris watching me, knowing my every move, was too much to bear. I never heard what happened to Iris. The police said she had disappeared, that they were still looking for her. I hope they catch her before she hurts anyone else. I still have nightmares about her eyes, about her twisted smile, the feeling of being watched. I haven't used Tinder since that day. I'm too afraid of what I might find. I'd never felt unsafe until that moment, and that moment changed my life forever. I'm much more careful now. I barely use any dating apps. I just want to go back to before I match with her on Tinder. I thought I was being paranoid until I found the hidden compartment. Before that, I was just chalking everything up to nerves and bad luck. You know, the usual dating app stuff. Matching with someone who looks vaguely normal in their pictures, only to find out they collect taxidermied squirrels or have strong opinions about the earth being flat. But Vernon was different. At first, he seemed almost perfect. We matched on Tinder. His profile was pretty standard. A couple of outdoorsy pics, hiking, kayaking, a smiling headshot, and a bio that said he was looking for someone to explore the city with. He seemed genuine and easygoing. We messaged back and forth for a few days, and the conversation flowed easily. He was funny, smart, and asked all the right questions. I was actually excited to meet him. Our first date was at a cozy little wine bar in my neighborhood. Vernon was even better in person. He was tall, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He listened intently, laughed at my jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He even paid without making a big deal about it, which is always a plus. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on hikes, saw movies, tried new restaurants. He always remembered the little things: my favorite flower, my go-to coffee order, the name of my childhood pet. He was attentive and thoughtful, almost too good to be true. My friends were even starting to get suspicious, joking that he was probably a serial killer or something. And that's when the little things started. At first, it was just small stuff. He'd show up at my apartment with groceries, even though I hadn't asked him to. He'd leave little notes on my car, saying things like "have a great day," or "thinking of you." It was sweet, but also a little intense. I brushed it off as him just being a romantic guy, but a tiny voice in the back of my head was starting to whisper warnings. Then he started showing up at places I hadn't told him I was going to be. Once I was grabbing coffee with a friend at a cafe across town, and he just happened to be there working on his laptop. Another time, I was at a yoga class, and he showed up, saying he'd been wanting to try it out. It was always a coincidence, he claimed, but the coincidences were becoming increasingly frequent and unsettling. I tried talking to him about it, telling him that I appreciated his thoughtfulness, but that I also needed my space. He was understanding, or at least he pretended to be. He apologized for being too eager and promised to back off. But the coincidences kept happening, and the little gifts kept appearing. One evening I came home from work to find a small package on my doorstep. It was a framed photo of me, taken through my apartment window while I was reading on the couch. My heart leaped into my throat. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was stalking. I immediately blocked Vernon's number and all his social media accounts. I told my friends and family what was happening, and they urged me to go to the police. But I was scared. I didn't have any concrete evidence, just a gut feeling and a creepy photo. I didn't want to overreact. I started being extra cautious. I changed my routines, varied my routes to work, and always made sure to lock my doors and windows. I felt like I was being watched constantly, like Vernon was always just around the corner. A few weeks went by and I didn't hear from him. I started to relax, thinking maybe he'd finally gotten the message. But then one night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from my living room. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly crept out of my bedroom. The living room was dark, but I could see a figure standing by the window. It was Vernon. He was just standing there, staring at me, a creepy smile on his face. "I just wanted to see you," he said, his voice low and menacing. I screamed and ran back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. He started pounding on the door, yelling my name. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. The police arrived quickly and arrested Vernon. As they were leading him away, he looked at me and said, "You can't hide from me forever." After that, I got a restraining order against him and installed a security system in my apartment. I thought I was safe, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, waiting for his chance. A few months later, I was cleaning out my closet when I noticed something odd about the back wall. It felt hollow. I started pulling away the paneling, and that's when I found it, a hidden compartment built into the wall. Inside, there was a collection of photographs, all of me. Some were recent, taken through my windows. Others were older, from years ago before I even met Vernon. There were photos of me walking to class in college, shopping at the grocery store, even visiting my parents' house. There was also a notebook filled with pages and pages of handwritten notes about me. My habits, my routines, my fears, my dreams, everything. I realized then that Vernon hadn't just started stalking me recently. He'd been watching me for years. He knew everything about me, and I had no idea. The police reopened the case, and they're still investigating. They think Vernon may have been responsible for other disappearances in the area. I'm living in a new city now, under a different name. I'm trying to rebuild my life, but the fear never really goes away. I still think about Vernon sometimes, wondering if he's still out there watching me. I know deep down that he probably is. Tinder is a terrifying app, and I'll never go on it again. I should have trusted my paranoia. The small fins were there, but I wasn't paying attention. I thought I was being paranoid until the police revealed his true history. You won't believe what happened to me last month. Seriously, I've told a few close friends, and they either laugh it off or give me this look like they're questioning my sanity. But I swear, every word of this is true. So I was on Tinder, right? Like everyone else these days. Just looking for some casual fun, maybe a connection if I got lucky. I matched with Ella. She was gorgeous, long blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, a smile that could melt glaciers. Her profile was pretty standard. A few selfies, a picture of her hiking, and a bio that said she was looking for adventure and good conversation. Seemed harmless enough. We started chatting, and she was witty, intelligent, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything, our jobs, our hobbies, our families. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to her messages. After a few days, we decided to meet up. She suggested a hike in this secluded state park about an hour outside of the city. I was a little hesitant. Meeting someone for the first time in the middle of nowhere felt a bit risky, but she was so persuasive, and I was so eager to meet her in person that I agreed. The day of the hike, the weather was perfect. Sunning with a light breeze. I drove to the park, and Ella was already waiting at the trailhead, looking even more stunning in person than she did in her pictures. We greeted each other with a hug, and I immediately felt a spark. The hike started out great. We walked and talked, laughing and sharing stories. The scenery was beautiful, lush forests, sparkling streams, breathtaking views. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd actually found someone special on Tinder. But then things started to get weird. We ventured deeper into the woods, the trail becoming narrower and more overgrown. The sunlight began to fade as the trees grew thicker, casting long, eerie shadows. Ella started acting strangely. She became quiet and withdrawn, her smile replaced by a distant, almost vacant expression. I asked her if she was okay, but she just shrugged and said she was fine, but I could tell something was off. She started veering off the main trail, heading deeper into the wilderness. I told her we should stick to the path, but she insisted that she knew a shortcut to a hidden waterfall. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem like a wimp, so I followed her. We hiked for what felt like hours, the forest growing darker and more menacing with each step. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I started to feel a sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Finally, we arrived at the waterfall. It was beautiful, cascading down a rocky cliff into a crystal-clear pool. But the beauty could mask the oppressive feeling of isolation that hung in the air. We were completely alone, surrounded by nothing but towering trees and the sound of rushing water. Ella walked to the edge of the pool and turned to face me. Her eyes were different now. They weren't the bright, sparkling blue I remembered. They were dark, almost black, and filled with a cold, unsettling intensity. "I have something to show you," she said, her voice low and raspy. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a knife. Not a small pocket knife, but a large, hunting knife with a serrated blade. My blood ran cold. "What are you doing?" I stammered, taking a step backward. She smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I told you I was looking for adventure," she said, "and this is going to be the adventure of your life." She lunged at me, the knife glinting in the fading light. I screamed and dodged out of the way, narrowly avoiding the blade. I turned and ran, scrambling back up the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. She chased after me, her footsteps echoing through the woods. I could hear her panting behind me, the sound of the knife scraping against the trees. I didn't dare look back. I ran for what felt like an eternity, stumbling and falling, branches tearing at my clothes. I could feel her getting closer, her breath hot on my neck. Just when I thought she was about to catch me, I burst out of the woods and onto the main trail. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and sped away, not daring to look back. I drove straight to the police station and told them everything that had happened. They took my statement, but they seemed skeptical. They searched the park, but they found no sign of Ella. No knife, no footprints, nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air. They told me they would keep an eye out, but they couldn't do anything without more evidence. I was on my own. I changed my number, deleted all my social media accounts, and moved to a different city. I still have nightmares about Ella, about her cold black eyes and the glint of the knife. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that she'll find me again. I'll never trust a dating app again. I'll never meet a stranger at a secluded location. And I'll never forget the day I went on a hike with a woman who tried to kill me. You won't believe me, but I saw something that day. Evil. It has never left me, and I still see Ella in the dark. I never imagined I'd be telling this story, especially not about something that started on Tinder. I'm not really a dating app guy, but I was bored, newly single, and a friend convinced me to give it a shot. Swiping felt like a game, a low-stakes way to pass the time. Most of the profiles were the same. Gem selfies, travel pics, the occasional group shot where you had to guess which one they were. But then I saw Evelyn's profile. She was different. Her photos weren't overly posed or filtered. She had a kind smile, a quirky bio about her love for vintage records and hiking, a general vibe that felt genuine. We matched, and I was surprised when she messaged me first. We talked about music, our favorite hiking trails, and our shared love for bad puns. She was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet for coffee. I was a little nervous, but the second I saw her, those nerves disappeared. She was even more beautiful in person, with a warm laugh and eyes that sparkled when she talked. We talked for hours that afternoon, and I felt a connection I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. We started seeing each other regularly. We went to concerts, explored new restaurants, and spent hours just talking and laughing. Evelyn was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was independent, intelligent, and had this infectious zest for life. I was falling for her hard. But then things started to get weird. It started with small things. She'd ask me questions about my past that felt a little too personal, a little too probing. Questions about my ex-girlfriends, my family, my deepest fears. I chalked it up to her being curious, wanting to know me better. But the questions kept coming, more and more intense, until it felt like an interrogation. Then there were the gifts. She started showering me with presents, things I hadn't even mentioned wanting. A rare edition of my favorite book, a vintage record I'd been searching for, even a custom-made leather jacket. At first, I was flattered, touched by her generosity. But the gifts kept piling up, each one more extravagant than the last, until it felt overwhelming, almost suffocating. One night, I was at her apartment and I noticed something strange. On her bookshelf, tucked away behind a row of books, was a framed photo of me. It was a photo I'd taken months ago, a candid shot for my Instagram. I hadn't given her a physical copy, so how did she get it? When I confronted her about it, she laughed it off, saying she just found it online and printed it out. I just wanted to have a picture of my handsome boyfriend, she said, batting her eyelashes. I tried to believe her, but something about her explanation felt off. Then came the calls and the texts, nonstop. If I didn't respond immediately, she'd call again and again, leaving increasingly frantic messages. She wanted to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing every second of the day. It was suffocating. I tried to talk to her about it, to tell her that I needed space, that her behavior was making me uncomfortable, but she wouldn't listen. She'd get defensive, accusing me of not loving her, of not caring about her feelings. She'd cry and beg me not to leave her, promising to change. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I went to her apartment to break up with her. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared for a tearful goodbye. What I wasn't prepared for was what I found when I arrived. The door was unlocked. I cautiously stepped inside, calling out her name. The apartment was dark and silent. I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it. On the wall, plastered with photos of me, was a shrine. There were pictures of me from my social media accounts, pictures of me taken without my knowledge, even pictures of me with my ex-girlfriends. The photos were arranged in a bizarre collage with my face circled in red marker. In the center of the shrine, written in what looked like blood, were the words, "You're mine forever." I froze, paralyzed with fear. I turned to run, but it was too late. Evelyn was standing behind me, a manic grin on her face. She was holding a knife. "You can't leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're mine. You'll always be mine." I lunged for the door, but she grabbed me, slashing at my arm with a knife. I screamed and wrestled free, managing to escape the apartment and run into the street. I called the police, who arrived moments later and apprehended Evelyn. They found even more disturbing things in her apartment, including a detailed journal documenting her obsession with me and plans to keep with her forever. It was terrifying. Evelyn was eventually charged with assault and stalking. I got a restraining order, moved to a new city, and started therapy to deal with the trauma. It's been years since that night, but I still have nightmares about Evelyn and her shrine. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts and not ignoring red flags, no matter how charming or attractive someone may seem. I still use dating apps, but I'm much more cautious now, paying close attention to the warning signs and trusting my gut when something feels off. Some people are not always what they seem. It's better to be safe than sorry. It was supposed to be a routine meetup, just another Tuesday night Tinder date. I've been on a string of them lately, some okay, some terrible, but nothing truly memorable. Until Winter, yes, that's her name. Her profile was intriguing, full of photos of her hiking in remote locations, and her bio mentioned a love for obscure folklore. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, so I swiped right without a second thought. We matched instantly, and our conversation was surprisingly engaging. Winter wasn't like the other girls I'd talked to on the app. She had a unique perspective on everything, and our chats often veered into philosophical discussions about the nature of reality and the power of belief. A bit intense for Tinder, maybe, but I was drawn to her energy. We decided to meet at a local bookstore cafe. It was a neutral public space, perfect for a first date. When Winter walked in, she was even more striking than her picture suggested. She had piercing blue eyes, long black hair, and wore a vintage dress that looked like it came straight out of the 1940s. She had an old-fashioned kind of beauty that was kind of captivating. The date started off well. We talked for hours about our shared interests, laughed at each other's jokes, and even debated the merits of different interpretations of ancient myths. Winter was intelligent, articulate, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. I was actually starting to think this might be something special. Then things took a turn. Out of nowhere, Winter started talking about a secluded cabin she owned in the woods, a place she described as being untouched by the modern world. She said it was a place where she went to connect with nature and explore her spiritual side. It was remote, hours away from the city and completely off the grid. She then dropped the bomb. She invited me to come with her for a weekend. "I feel a strong connection with you," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "I think we could learn a lot from each other in a place like that." I was hesitant. I barely knew her, and the idea of spending a weekend in a remote cabin with a stranger was unsettling. But there was something about Winter that was hard to resist. Maybe it was her intense gaze, her unwavering conviction, or the sheer novelty of the situation. Whenever it was, I found myself saying yes. Looking back, that was my first mistake. We left the city early Friday morning, driving for hours down winding country roads. As we got further and further away from civilization, the landscape became increasingly desolate. The trees grew taller, the sky grew darker, and the air grew colder. There was no cell service, no signs of life, just us and the endless expanse of the forest. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it was even more isolated than I had imagined. It was a small, dilapidated structure nestled deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest road. There was no electricity, no running water, just a wood-burning stove and a few oil lamps. Winter seemed perfectly at home. She unpacked her bags, started a fire in the stove, and began preparing a simple meal. I tried to help, but I mostly just felt awkward and out of place. The silence of the woods was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. As the night wore on, Winter's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started talking about strange rituals she performed in the woods, about ancient spirits that inhabited the trees, and about the power of the full moon. She said she wanted to show me something special, something that would open my eyes to the true nature of reality. I was getting seriously creeped out. I tried to politely decline, but Winter insisted. She said it was important, that I needed to experience it for myself. She led me out of the cabin and into the darkness of the woods. The forest was pitch black, the only light coming from the full moon filtering through the trees. Winter led me deeper and deeper into the woods, her pace quickening with each step. I struggled to keep up, stumbling over roots and branches in the darkness. Finally, we arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large stone altar, covered in strange symbols and surrounded by candles. Winter turned to me, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. "Tonight," she said, her voice low and hypnotic, "we will perform a ritual to connect with the ancient spirits of this land. We will offer them a sacrifice, a token of our devotion." I stared at her in disbelief. "A sacrifice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" Winter smiled, a chillingly sinister smile. "Don't worry," she said. "It's nothing you'll miss." She then pulled a knife from her pocket. It was a hunting knife, with a long, sharp blade. She held it up to the moonlight, the steel glinting ominously. That's when I knew I was in serious danger. I tried to run, but Winter was too fast. She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the altar. I struggled against her, but she was surprisingly strong. I realized then that this whole thing had been a setup. She had lured me out here under false pretenses, with the intention of... Well, I didn't want to think about it. Just as she was about to force me onto the altar, I managed to break free. I kicked her in the stomach, sending her stumbling backward. I didn't wait to see if she got up. I turned and ran as fast as I could, back into the darkness of the woods. I ran for what felt like hours, stumbling through the trees, desperate to escape Winter and her twisted ritual. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from her. Eventually, I collapsed from exhaustion, hidden beneath a thicket of bushes. I lay there, panting and trembling, listening for any sign of Winter. But there was only silence. I spent the rest of the night puddled beneath the bushes, terrified that she would find me. As soon as the sun began to rise, I started walking, determined to find my way back to civilization. It took me 2 days, but I finally managed to reach a main road. I flagged down a passing car, and the driver was kind enough to give me a ride to the nearest town. I went straight to the police station and told them everything that had happened. They took my statement and launched an investigation. They searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, but they never found Winter. She had vanished without a trace. I don't know who Winter really was or what she was planning to do to me, but I know that I came dangerously close to becoming a victim of her twisted obsession. It was supposed to be a routine meetup, but it turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. Now I stick to coffee dates. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs plastered all over her profile, subtly woven into our conversations, radiating off her like heat from a furnace. But you know you're swiping late at night, a few beers in, and sometimes you ignore the little things that should make you pause. Jade was striking. That's the best word for it. She had this intense gaze in her photos, like she was looking right through the camera and into your soul. Dark hair, pale skin, a sort of gothic beauty that, admittedly, appealed to my slightly twisted aesthetic. Her bio was all about being misunderstood and searching for a kindred spirit. Red flag number 1, I guess. But hey, who doesn't feel a little misunderstood sometimes? We matched, and almost immediately she started messaging me. Not just the usual hey, but actual thoughtful questions. She asked about my interests, my dreams, my fears. It felt intimate, almost too soon. I was flattered. I hadn't had a great run with dating apps, mostly just awkward small talk and ghosting. Jade was different. We met a few days later at a dive bar downtown. She was even more striking in person. She wore all black, a long velvet dress, and heavy boots. She had a collection of silver rings on her fingers, each adorned with some kind of dark stone. The bar was loud and crowded, but when she talked, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. She told me about her life, how she always felt like an outsider, how she was drawn to the darker aspects of the world, how she believed in things beyond our understanding. I was intrigued. I've always been a bit of a skeptic, but there was something about her conviction that was captivating. We ended up going back to my place that night. I know, a classic Tinder mistake. But I felt a connection with her, a pull I couldn't explain. The sex was intense, almost ritualistic. She kept whispering things in my ear that I couldn't quite make out, and her eyes were fixed on mine the entire time. It was exhilarating and a little unnerving. The next few weeks were a blur. I spent almost every waking moment with Jade. She became my world. I neglected my friends, skipped work, and basically abandoned my responsibilities. I was completely under her spell. That's when the weirdness started to ramp up. She started talking more and more about the supernatural. She claimed to be a practicing witch, descended from a long line of powerful women. She told me about spells and rituals, about communicating with spirits and manipulating energies. I tried to be open-minded, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore the growing sense of unease. Then she started asking me to participate in her rituals. At first, it was just small things, lighting candles, chanting in a language I didn't understand. But then it escalated. She asked me to gather strange ingredients like animal bones and rare herbs. She wanted me to help her create elaborate altars in my apartment. I tried to push back, to tell her that I wasn't comfortable with it, but she was relentless. She'd guilt me, manipulate me, tell me that I was ruining everything, that I was betraying our connection. I was so infatuated with her that I couldn't say no. One night, she told me she wanted to perform a binding ritual. She said it would solidify our connection and protect us from negative energies. I was hesitant, but she convinced me that it was necessary. She said it would be the most powerful thing we'd ever done together. The ritual took place in my living room, which had been transformed into a macabre altar. There were candles everywhere, casting flickering shadows on the walls. There were symbols drawn on the floor in chalk, and strange objects scattered around the room. Jade was dressed in a long black robe. She had painted symbols on her face and arms, and her eyes were wild and intense. She instructed me to strip naked and lie on the floor. She then began to chant in a guttural language, waving a smoking censer over my body. As the ritual progressed, I started to feel strange. My body grew numb and my vision blurred. I felt like I was floating, disconnected from reality. Jade's chanting grew louder and more frantic, and the air in the room crackled with energy. Suddenly, she stopped chanting and looked down at me. Her eyes were no longer human. They were black and empty like bottomless pits. She smiled, a slow, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. Now, she said, her voice raspy and distorted, Udikon one. She reached down and grabbed a dagger, its blade gleaming in the candlelight. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body was paralyzed. I was completely helpless. Just as she raised the dagger above me, there was a loud crash. The door to my apartment burst open, and 2 police officers rushed in, guns drawn. They tackled Jade to the ground, wrestling the dagger from her grasp. I don't know how they knew what was happening, but they saved my life. It turned out that Jade was wanted for questioning in connection with several disappearances in the area. She was suspected of being involved in a cult that practiced human sacrifice. The police had been tracking her for months, and they finally caught up with her just in time. I spent weeks recovering from the trauma. I had nightmares every night, reliving the ritual over and over again. I went to therapy, trying to make sense of what had happened. I learned that Jade was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying vulnerable people and exploiting their weaknesses. She had used me, manipulated me, and nearly killed me. Looking back, I see all the warning signs that I ignored. Her intense gaze, her talk of being misunderstood, her fascination with the dark arts. I was so blinded by lust and infatuation that I couldn't see the danger right in front of me. I'm still afraid to use dating apps. I'm afraid of falling under someone's spell again. I'm afraid of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the world. Jade is in prison now, but I know she's still out there in my nightmares. And I know that I'll never truly be free of her. I should have listened to my gut. I should have seen the warning signs. Now I'm paying the price. Tinder is a dangerous place, and I got lucky to be alive. The police showing up at the last minute doesn't always happen. Protect yourself.